thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Bill Brewer, here on behalf of the Nevada Housing Coalition. The coalition is working to create sustainable solutions through community awareness, capacity building, and advocacy to ensure housing options for all Nevadans. If you're not already a member of the coalition, we invite you to join us. And we want to show our appreciation to our founding sponsors, Wells Fargo and Schwab Bank. A couple of housekeeping issues this morning. The chat feature will remain enabled for the webinar. If you have questions for our presenters as we cover the next hour, please enter them in the chat box and we'll do our best to address them during the webinar or afterward if necessary. Additionally, the National Low Income Housing Coalition is on the line today to help supplement and support the discussion. The timing for this webinar just couldn't be better. Much of the CARES Act was largely set to expire as of December 31st, and we had no idea if additional help was coming for 2021 or not. Now that we know that help is on the way, we're not exactly sure what all that will look like. In addition, the political landscape is changing with the election of a Democratic administration and the recent Senate elections. And there have also been changes to Nevada's court processes for evictions and mediation efforts for homeowners, landlords, and renters. All this could mean additional opportunities for housing to have an enhanced role in the recovery. We're very grateful to have Senator Cortez Masto on with us this morning to bring us the latest from the nation's capital. Senator Cortez Masto.
Bill, I don't see the senator on here. We do have her for 9:05, so we're a little early. Oh, and she may be joining us just now. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning. How is everyone this morning?
Great. Thank you so much, Senator, for joining us this morning.
Oh, absolutely. I'm always excited to talk about how we can work together to address affordable housing needs in our state. So thank you for putting this webinar on. I so appreciate all the good work you all are doing.
Well, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, and good morning, everyone. So as we continue to work towards our goal of addressing our housing needs in the state, let me just say I look forward to continue working with all of you in the new Congress that is coming up with the new administration. Let me talk a little bit about what we have done so far. Many of you are aware we passed just recently our appropriations bill. We put it in an omnibus bill this time, and we also incorporated into it another COVID relief package. So it's really this omnibus bill that has both of these kind of pieces of legislation together, and it's in the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021. But here's the important thing, and that's why I wanted to talk to all of you, let you know what we've done. Let me start with the COVID relief portion of the bill. As you all know, this is the fifth bill we've passed to support our communities during this crisis, and it sets aside $25 billion for rental assistance. Nevada's share of that is estimated at more than $205 million. I have staff now on the call here and working with our local leaders and folks in Nevada to make sure we get the money to where it needs to go for so many that need rental assistance. Another feature of the legislation is that landlords will now be able to apply for money directly to pay the tenant's rent, and that should make it faster for the funds to get out and benefit our renters. The funds also include utility assistance for renters, support for wraparound services, and administrative funds to help the agencies that administer these monies. In addition, the legislation allows state and local governments more time, and this is one thing that we've all talked about, including with our local governments, more time to spend the coronavirus relief funds that were originally provided through the CARES Act. I know these deadlines for disbursement have put a lot of pressure on governments that were trying to provide emergency aid, and now they'll have through the end of 2021 to do so. And that should help housing groups continue to process the rental assistance requests, which I know have been a challenge. Additionally, the bill also makes permanent the 4% floor for the low-income housing tax credit. And as I know, talking with all of you over the last few years, it's going to make it easier to get financing for low-income housing projects or ones that have been on hold. This was a top request from our housing developers and governments that know we need more affordable housing units. I am hearing advocates estimate it could create as much as 130,000 rental homes in the next 10 years. In addition, the Act funds the government for 2021. That's the appropriations piece of it. It includes money for the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Department of Agriculture's Rural Development Program. It provides HUD with $49.6 billion, which is more than $500 million increase over the 2020 levels, and $12 billion more than requested by the president. There were also small increases to programs, including funds for tenant-based vouchers, for project-based rental assistance, for CDBG, assistance to aid people experiencing homelessness, and some others. And then in USDA's rural housing programs, they received mostly level funding with a small increase for rental assistance and multifamily housing preservation. These increases are the result of really a lot of hard work by so many housing advocates, including all of you. And so I just want to thank you for making sure that your voices are being heard on the needs throughout our communities and across the country, and particularly in Nevada. Now, with that said, I also co-sponsored, with many of your advice and help and thought into it, some laws that did pass this Congress as well. We were able to pass a bill that considered manufactured housing in the consolidated planning process, a bill improving access to mortgage finance on tribal lands. We passed a bill requiring carbon monoxide detectors in assisted living homes that use gas as an energy source, and a bill to extend tenant-based assistance for youth aging out of foster care under specified circumstances. And finally, we are requiring lenders to work with borrowers who are having trouble paying their mortgages. We don't want a repeat of the foreclosure crisis that we saw in our state. Additionally, I've been working with our government entities like the Federal Housing Finance Agency to provide forbearance for loans guaranteed by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. I've also worked with HUD to extend forbearance for FHA-backed loans. And I've worked with other mortgage servicers to ensure that borrowers were getting options that enable them to stay in their homes by extending the terms of their loans or restructuring payments. So that's the good news. That's what we were able to achieve during this last Congress. Of course, we all know there's more that needs to be done and that we can do. We know we need at least, from what I hear from so many of you, 10 million new affordable homes. We have to avoid evictions for 20 million families. And I'm going to continue to keep pushing the Senate for additional relief as we can take in and the new administration comes in and we get the chance to work with them. With that said, going into the new Congress, I also have in the pipeline, as I sit on banking and housing, and I just talked to Sherrod Brown, who now will be the chair of Banking and Housing Committee, which I'm hoping we change it to the Housing and Banking Committee. Affordable housing is really going to be our priority. And so we were just talking about the bills and areas where we can focus on legislation that helps promote low-income housing and increase housing fairness in the next Congress. So there's a number of bills that I already have in the pipeline. We can talk to you about those, or I can have my staff share that information with all of you offline, get it to you, take a look at it. I will, though, just let you know I'm continuing to press for additional funding for affordable housing, including a bill to increase affordable housing from the Federal Home Loan Bank system and to make improvements to the mortgage revenue bonds. And let me just say, I appreciate the feedback from so many of you on these proposals, so thank you. I've already talking with the Biden administration on what we need to do to restore housing protections, to access shelter for transgender people, and housing assistance to mixed status families. So we will continue down that path. What we need to do to reverse some of the harmful rules that we saw changed by the current administration and HUD. And we just need greater protections, I believe, from the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau in some of these areas. So those are our priorities. If you have any more, please let us know. I look forward to working with all of you in the new Congress. It's a two-year Congress. If you don't know, each session of Congress, and the one we're going into is the 117th Congress. It's 2 years. So we've got an opportunity really with an administration coming in that I am so grateful for the opportunity to work with to really get something done. And with us having now in banking and housing a chairmanship that really can put on in committee bills that really address the needs that we're seeing, not just in Nevada, but across the country, and debate those and really come together to address the needs. I am hopeful and really excited about our opportunities going into this Congress. But it all starts with all of you. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me or my staff. I know so many of you have been already doing so. I cannot thank you enough for all of your good work. Christine, thank you. You've been such a pleasure to work with. And I also know that our wonderful state treasurer, Zach Conine, is going to be talking to you. He's been fantastic. We've been working with him to make sure we are able to create what we need in the state of Nevada to get the money to so many in need right now when it comes to the housing and security. So just want to say thank you all. I wish you all really a really healthy, prosperous coming year and the opportunity for all of us to work together. Thank you again for letting me just say a few words in the opening of this webinar.
Well, thank you so much, Senator. We just can't thank you enough for being here today, especially after the events of yesterday. I know that it was a late night for you, and it's wonderful that you're able to be with us this morning. And we really do appreciate the voice that we have for housing in Washington, D.C., thanks to you, and that you are on a committee that's very important to all of us. So thank you very much, and we look forward to working with you in the upcoming Congress.
Well, Bill, thank you. And also thank you to the Nevada Rural Housing Authority. You guys, again, it's just this collective effort of everybody working together, and your advocacy has been really instrumental in the work that we're doing here and getting some of this legislation passed and what we need in our state. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure to join you this morning.
Thank you very much. With that, we need to talk about the chat program, the COVID housing assistance program that's functioned for Nevadans who are housing stressed in 2020. Our state treasurer, Zach Conine, is with us this morning, and he was instrumental in getting all those initial allocations of CARES funding to the administering agencies and getting it to those who need it. And now we can expect some tweaks to that program in the coming year, along with some additional funding opportunities for Nevada. So welcome, State Treasurer Zach Conine.
Thanks so much, Bill, and thanks again to the Housing Coalition, not just for having me, but as the Senator said, for the work that you all do every day. The State Treasurer historically hasn't spent too much time on housing, so we're happy to be here, and thanks for being so welcoming, and frankly, just thanks for all the expertise, right? Because Bill and his colleagues around the state have been really just instrumental in making sure that we can get these programs up and running. And when we figure out ways to do something a little bit better or a little bit faster and get the money out the door, everybody's been really responsive to that. I also see our Labor Commissioner, Shannon Chambers, who's been running Home Means Nevada and just massive programs to help people get through this process. So it takes a group effort, and I know the Senator dropped off, but I'm just deeply grateful that she was able to join us and is safe after the absolute abhorrent nonsense of yesterday. Anyway, that aside, as COVID-19 impacted countless families across the state of Nevada, our office focused on ways that we can take risks off the table for Nevadans who are struggling. We've done a number of different things to that front on the housing side, but also we've run what appears to be the largest small business assistance program in the history of the state, and some commercial rental assistance pieces. Now, the Senator talked a little bit about the new money that's coming in. And so let's talk about how the new money and the old money will interact. So under the CARES Act, We had funds through something called the Coronavirus Relief Fund that we were able to put out in partnership with Clark County, the Reno Housing Authority, and the Nevada Rural Housing Authority to get money in the hands of individuals who needed it. That's great. There's still a little bit of that money left, and that program will continue until we get in this next round of money that the senator referred to. That next round of money is that $25 billion in emergency rental assistance. We think Nevada, to the senator's point, is going to get somewhere between 205 and 206 million. Now that money can be used for past due rent, future rent payments, and utility expenses. So more specific than the CARES Act funding, but also a little bit more defined, which will be helpful for agencies trying to figure out where best to spend those dollars. It also extends the CDC's rental eviction moratorium through January 31st. Now, of course, the governor's moratorium goes a few months longer than that, and we believe is broader, but we do still see, as I'm sure do many of you, evictions proceeding for reasons outside or claiming to not be covered by the moratorium. And there are people who can talk about that more intelligently than I am. But I think it's deeply important that we continue looking for ways to try and avoid evictions, and that's what this money can be used for. Now, the new federal funding coming in for housing is a little bit more described as to where it goes than the original CARES Act funding, which for the most part went to the state. Some went to Clark County, some went to the city of Las Vegas. The state will receive 55% of that 206 million, or about 113 million. Cities and counties are eligible to receive the remaining 45% of funds directly if they have populations greater than 200,000 people, or if they're a county with a population of greater than 200,000 people. So for those of you keeping score at home, that means Clark County will receive about 31 million directly, and the city of Las Vegas could receive 19.6 million. Henderson can receive up to 9.6, and North Las Vegas can receive 7.6 million. That's down south. Up north, Reno will receive $8 million directly if they apply for it, and Washoe will receive 6.5 million. Because obviously the population of Reno exists within the population of Washoe, and that's how that math works. Now we'll be working with all of the state agencies and municipalities to try and encourage everyone to continue to use the programs that are already out there. The CHAP program in its sort of CHAP 2.0, as opposed to setting up new programs. It's hard to stress how important it is to make sure that Nevadans, and you all deal with them every day, are able to get funding directly into programs that are already existing and helping, right? We know that at least on the business side, we've seen what happens when there are different programs at different levels, county programs that are for certain folks, city programs that are for certain folks, and then state programs, and the confusion that can create in the marketplace. So I think having centralized locations becomes the most effective. And I see my staff is answering a question from Senator Ratty. Hello, Senator. So that's how the money is going to flow. Now, we expect that money is going to come in the next 25 days or so, but we're not sure when we're going to get guidance from the Treasury as to how exactly it can be spent and what the exact rules are. So we're going to be working with Federal Treasury and, of course, our delegation and Senator Cortez Masto to try and get that information so we can get the funds out as quick as possible. Let's go back to CHAP. The state has committed $30 million in rental assistance directly. Clark County has committed an additional approximately $70 million. And the city of Reno and the city of Sparks have also used CARES Act funding to rental assistance. Some quick stats. Clark County has received 32,000 applications so far. 14,000 of those applications have been processed, which have put about $50 million out the door. And there's about $140 million of applications behind them. The county plans to process about 8,000 to 9,000 more applications in the queue using the existing CRF dollars, and then we'll transition to dollars from CARES Act 5.0, or whatever we want to call the most recent $200 million coming in. Reno Housing Authority has about $2.5 million in state funds remaining, and we'll continue to get that out the door. And the Rural Housing Authority has received about 3,200 applications, funding about $2.1 million so far, with about $2.5 million of the existing funding remaining. There are some new rules around the funds that are coming in. One is a eligibility requirement of less than 80% of AMI. CRF dollars did not have an AMI requirement, and as such, money was going out to anybody who needed it without an income check. The AMI requirement, however, is being checked at time of application. So if someone has recently lost a job, it's not going to look back at the last year and figure out whether or not they had enough income. It'll look at them at a point in time. We believe that's going to cover a majority of people who apply. Additionally, there's some legislative language around a 50% preference. So having a preference for folks at 50% or less of AMI before 80%. We're waiting on Treasury guidance to understand what preference really means. Do we need to bucket people directly? Do we need to get through everybody at 50% before 80%, which would obviously be logistically troubling. So we'll be figuring that out. Clark County has 200 people right now that will remain on staff, contract staff, to process applications, which is great. And like I mentioned, we're working to try and regionalize the rental assistance programs. We've done a great job of that in Northern Nevada, and hopefully we can do a great job of that in Southern Nevada to make sure that the money gets to where it needs to get, and we can avoid as much confusion as possible. Like I said, Reno and the rural housing authorities are going to keep using existing dollars and then continue building waiting lists, which can then be processed through CARES 2.0 as we get it. One of the other questions that we have on the next round of housing assistance money is whether or not we can continue to use an attestation model. So during this process, one of the things we realized was that we had a lot of drop off between the time that individuals applied for housing assistance and going back and forth with them to get all of the information and the paperwork and reviewing the paperwork, and it was simply just taking too long. Now we have a little bit more time now because of the extension that the senator mentioned in CARES funds, but obviously when people are coming to us for help, they're coming to us and they need help now. They don't need help 6 to 8 weeks later. So we switched to an attestation process, which effectively means that the borrower, not the borrower, the grantee is able to say, I need help. I fall within these different categories, and then they're able to sign under penalty of perjury, as opposed to our staff needing to go through and really it's people like Bill, right, and his staff going through and figuring out and looking at all the documentation, and that obviously speeds up the process. We're hopeful that we can continue that going with the new CARES funding, but we're going to have to wait on Treasury guidance to see. Of course, with the transition, which is hopefully very helpful as far as getting additional help on rental and a dozen other things, we know that that's probably going to slow down guidance a little bit. One more thing to talk about, happy to take any questions if effective, is eviction mediation. Commissioner Chambers, I mentioned, has been doing a lot of work on this front, as has legal aid, both in North and South. And the state remains committed to finding ways for landlords and tenants to work together to come to agreements on how to best keep people in their homes. We're asking people to stay home for Nevada when they can. We're asking people to be safe. And a big piece of fighting this pandemic is making sure that people have safe places to live. We also know that economic recovery exists on the back of housing stability. It is deeply difficult in a state like ours that has such a discretionary based income stream. As your state treasurer, I spent a lot of time looking at that income stream. It is really hard to count on Nevadans to spend money when they're worried about losing their homes. It's obvious. And so we've got to make sure that we keep people in their homes and that we build more affordable housing in order to avoid those problems and those economic issues outside of just the moral responsibility I think we all have to do what we can for our fellow Nevadans. With the change in the most recent stimulus bill, we have more time to use those coronavirus relief funds, which means we're able to keep the eviction mediation programs up and running as long as they're necessary, and we'll continue to use them. So far, they've heard over 12,000 cases. And I know Bailey, I think from legal aid, is going to go into this a little bit later on, that even with the current eviction moratorium, evictions are still occurring. And that's why we need to continue to strengthen the mediation program to prevent as many possible evictions as we can and continue to shrink and speed up the process on the funding side so that when evictions start, we're able to quickly get people funds. We've also created a pipeline for folks who are about to get evicted to be able to get closer to the front of the line for adjudication on unemployment, which of course has continued to be a challenge, but that process appears to be working relatively well and hopefully will continue to get better. I'll end with this. As we go into the next year and we're coming up on a state of the state, the governor and I continue to look for ways to increase the amount of affordable housing that's in the state. We've done a little bit more than $600 million worth of private activity bond funded new projects, single family rental assistance, and affordable housing project refreshes over the last 2 years, which we believe is a state record. we're going to continue that pressure up and continue looking for ways to work with the federal delegation to bring much needed affordable housing to the state. It is a central piece of any economic recovery plan, and we really appreciate all of your help in making sure it gets done. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Mr. Conine. It really is a pleasure to have you here. Just one follow-up question about allocations. Do you know if the state will be allocating any of those new funds to other jurisdictions besides the entitled ones over 200,000?
Yeah, so we haven't, because we don't know what the rules are yet, we haven't made a plan there. Obviously the goal is those funds don't have a purpose at the state other than purposes of helping people avoid eviction, right? So we want to make sure we move those funds, those rental assistance funds, where they need to be. I think we found during the first program that the easiest way to guarantee success and to speed up the process is to use regional partners, right? So instead of, for instance, sending it to a small city that would then have to set up their own rental assistance program, to encourage that city to work with the Reno Housing Authority or the Rural Housing Authority or Clark County's process in order to get those dollars out the door. So we'll continue to work with them on that and figure out the best way to keep Nevadans in their homes.
Great. Thank you so much, and really appreciate all your help. I'm sure you've learned a lot about housing over the past year, so thank you very much.
Well, thanks for all the lessons.
You bet. So in order to keep us on time, we'll go ahead with our agenda here with an overview of the CARES Act Relief Implementation and Emergency Solutions Grant. Under that act is our Nevada Housing Division Administrator, Steve Aichroth. Steve.
Good morning. Thank you, Bill. Thanks to the Nevada Housing Coalition for letting me discuss this, and thank you both to the Senator's staff and the Senator and Treasurer Conine for all their support in what we're doing. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the implementation of the CARES Act. The Treasurer really did a fine job of covering that, but I do want to speak specifically to Emergency Solutions Grants. And I'm going to refer to it as ESG. It's just easier. And ESG funds are something that the state gets every year. And ESG is really meant to support homeless prevention, homeless assistance, and give people some stability. So the ESG-CV funds, so that's a different bucket than the standard ESG, is used to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus among individuals and families who are homeless, receiving homeless assistance, and support the homeless activities to mitigate those impacts created by coronavirus. And I'm going to give you just a quick list of some of the things you can do with this funding. And that is short and medium term rental assistance, security deposits, utility deposits, the lease of motels and hotels for social distancing and reducing density in shelters, street outreach, try to get those people out who are chronically homeless and get them into shelters and get them to the point where they're not having COVID impacts, cleaning supplies for shelter operations, housing stability case management, and services to individuals and families in the emergency shelter and non-congregate settings that we currently have established. As I mentioned, the state usually receives ESG funds on an annual basis. And the portion that goes to the housing division that effectively we use in the rural and non-entitlement areas of the state is about $400,000 annually. With the ESG-CV funds, this was a separate source of funding. And this came across last year. And the entitlements communities, there's 4 in addition to the state. The city of Las Vegas received $9.8 million. City of North Las Vegas received $3.6 million. City of Reno received $4.2 million. And Clark County received $14.6 million. So statewide, that's just north of 40 million, including what the Nevada Housing Division received in funding, which is $7.8 million. So when we received this money, we went and created 3 different buckets of use. And you know, this happened back in September, October, previous to what we've seen lately signed at the end of December with the additional funding that the Senator and Treasurer referenced. So we created 3 different buckets. We were going to use 25% of our funding for current ESG grantees to assist them in those services that I previously mentioned. We also were going to have a 25% funding for statewide competitive applications, and we were reserving 50% for CHAP-like funding to continue the programs because we did not know if there was ever going to be another source of money coming through. So on October 15th, we held a meeting with the local jurisdictions that I just mentioned, just to kind of get an idea of what their proposed uses were at the time. And there was an awful lot of discussion about rapid rehousing, eviction prevention from the standpoint of, and I won't even call it eviction prevention, but you know, we knew that people were going to get evicted, and you know, getting them into hotels, getting them short-term housing, trying to keep a roof over everyone's head, and shelter expansion. So what have we done? NHD opened the ESG-CV application process November 25th. We closed it a month later, and we're currently evaluating those submitted applications. We did not receive any applications for rental assistance, and our 25% bucket that we set up for rural applications exceeded the available by almost double. So with the passing of the recent legislation, we know that we're going to have to reallocate that bucket of rental assistance that we had set aside. So right now we're evaluating our options. We're going to engage the local jurisdictions, as you just heard. And we want to make everybody aware that on this call that there will be additional funding available, and we'll be releasing that. So the timelines for that, we have to obligate the funds by April 7th of 2021. So we'll be starting this process pretty quick. All ESG-CV funds must be expended by September 30th of 2022. So we do have some time in getting this process through, and providing the assistance for, you know, a lengthy period of time. Now, there are some caveats to that, is that HUD may recapture up to 20% of our award if we have not spent at least 20% by September 30th of 2021. So we've got, you know, roughly 8 months to get 20% out the door, and we need to get that money, 80% of that money also out by March 31st of 2022, or HUD can recapture that money. So I know there's a lot of folks on the call listening, and money will be available. We'll be starting, I'm sure, a NOFA process here rather rapidly to try to get this money, as I mentioned, obligated by April 7th. And with that, I just kind of wanted to wrap up, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Steve. Really great information, and we appreciate all that you're doing to get that money out the door and serving people who need it. Next up, we'll have some updates for the Community Development Block Grant and application opportunities relative to housing from Patricia Herzog from the Governor's Office of Economic Development. Patty?
Good morning. Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Christine, for the opportunity to join the meeting today. I'm going to run through some of the information on the Community Development Block Grant funds specific to the Coronavirus and CARES Act. We've been working on getting out round 1, which was for non-entitlement communities. Today, I'm going to focus on round 2, which is statewide, and round 3, which is non-entitlements. Next slide, please. So just an overview of Community Development Block Grant Program. This is through the HUD housing and urban development. This is for development of suitable living environments. The purpose is to get supply of decent housing, creation of economic opportunities in rural parts of the state, and projects are funded primarily to serve low and moderate income persons. Next slide. I think we skipped one there. Thank you. There are 3 national objectives that we need to meet with the Community Development Block Grant Program. Again, a benefit to 51% or more of LMI persons, aid in the prevention or elimination of slum and blight, and to address recent urgent need when it comes to community development. All grants must meet at least one of these national objectives. Up until the coronavirus, objective number 3 was rarely, if ever, used, although this recent event has brought that into the forefront. Next slide. For a project to be fundable, it has to pass 2 tests. It has to meet that national objective, and then it must be an eligible activity. In our program, we specifically work with the non-entitlement areas. Those are cities with populations of less than 50,000 and counties with populations of less than 200,000. So we do have round 2, which is a statewide allocation. So we are working with entitlements on round 2. Next slide. Should be noted that cities and counties can sponsor subrecipients. Nonprofits, for-profit businesses, and housing authorities can be subrecipients. But all of those grant agreements are between eligible entities and the state of Nevada. Next slide. So I wanted to address the urgent need portion of this. To meet this national objective, applicants need to document that the activity is designed to alleviate existing conditions that pose a serious and immediate threat to health and welfare of the community. The conditions must be of recent origin, which means they need to happen within the last 18 months. And the applicant must document that they're unable to finance this activity. Again, just pointing out that the current pandemic meets these with regard to the national objective. Next slide, please. Some of the eligible activities, specifically with the ESG-CV funding, the key words here are we need to look at eligible activities that prevent, prepare, and respond to the spread of infectious disease. Some broad categories of services here. You can look at building improvements, including public facilities, assistance to businesses for economic development assistance, increase of public services, and planning capacity building and technical assistance. Next slide. So specific to round 2, this is a statewide allocation. HUD allocated $1 billion to states and insular programs on May 11th of 2020. Those allocations were based on public health needs, the risk of transmission, and number of coronavirus cases compared to the national average, and the disruption to the economic and housing markets. Nevada, based on that criteria, Nevada received just shy of $10 million, and the notice of funding availability was announced November of 2020. Next slide, please. Working closely with Steve and the Division of Housing, the CDBG office came up with a formula allocation based on that criteria. Initially, this was for all counties in Nevada at the county level. It was suggested to move to also include entitlement communities in this as well. It should be noticed that the data becomes very granular when you go to the city level. So that's why we kept it at the county level, but wanted to make sure that entitlement communities received funding. So this is a list of how that funding broke out. And the highlighted are the entitlement cities. Thank you. Next slide. For allocation round 3, this will go back to non-entitlements only. These were announced on September 11th. Part B just corrected some of the allocations for the DC area and some other states. Nevada received approximately just shy of 2.5 million. Again, this will be for non-entitlements only. Next slide. I just wanted to make sure everybody knew what those non-entitlement communities are. Those highlighted here meet the LMI requirement. Those that are not would do a survey to make sure that their eligible projects met the LMI requirements. Next slide. Some important dates to remember here for both round 2 and round 3. The eligibility due date is March 23rd. So you want to get your projects figured out and make sure that they meet the eligibility by that deadline. Completed applications are due on April 27th. We will be using Zoom grants for that. Round 3, our state CDBG advisory committee will be meeting in May, and all projects will begin on July 1st. Next slide. Here are some references. One of the references here is the quick guide to eligible activities. This has been a cornerstone of what we've come back to with eligible projects. Something to keep in mind also is the duplication of benefits resources available on the HUD exchange, and also a link to the NOFA. The ESG money that Steve talked about would be the first line of funding that folks would go to. And then we can look at ESG-CV as a possible program to supplement. But we have to be very careful of duplication of benefits when it comes to housing projects. And next slide. Just some of our contact information. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this, and I'm happy to answer any questions offline.
Thank you, Patty. Really appreciate that. And great to have CDBG at the table this morning. Want to mention that we had hoped to keep this meeting to an hour. There's so much important information, though. It's going to be probably a couple of minutes over. We apologize for that, but we'll do the best we can to take care of your time. As you know, Nevada's eviction processes have been changed a little bit with the pandemic. And so here to update us on how that's going is Bailey Bordelin from Legal Aid. Bailey.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Like you said, I'm Bailey Bordelin. I represent all of the legal aid providers in the state of Nevada. So I just went ahead and put a few of those providers in the chat area if you need contact depending on your geographical area. So like the other presenters have mentioned, I just want to thank everyone for working in this space that is becoming more and more critical every day as we continue to try to find our way out of this. Evictions have been the bulk of the legal crisis that we've been dealing with really since the beginning in March. The projections at first were reported to be between 259,000 to 311,000 Nevadans were at risk of eviction. And as the summer went on, that was increased to 419,000 to 501,000 Nevadans were facing eviction by the end of 2020. So all of the steps that the governor has taken to protect people in this crisis have been absolutely critical and important to keep people in their homes. The most recent eviction moratorium was put in place in December, and that was a response to the November numbers that we saw. So the state eviction moratorium had lifted on October 15th, and it was really the hope of everyone that the CDC federal protections that were put in place and have been extended to January 31st would be enough to help us deal with the brunt of this crisis. But what we found is that it really just wasn't. We saw a flood of evictions in November that was located primarily in Las Vegas, where the bulk of evictions do occur in our state. There are over 30 justice courts, which is where evictions take place in Nevada. But just in the one Las Vegas Justice Court, what we saw was that in a typical November of 2019, there were 2,387 evictions. And in this November, with the CDC protections in place that were supposed to be preventing evictions for anyone that was unable to pay due to the pandemic, with rental assistance available and with eviction mediation available, 4,263 evictions were still granted just in the Las Vegas Justice Court. And so that doubled number were, again, people that fell through those 3 layers of protections that were in place. So if we had seen all of those expire on December 31st, I think we would be in a bad place right now as a community. We are struggling to find resources and find solutions for people that have already been evicted or people who are still being evicted. Because what we really know with Nevada's eviction process is that once that lockout has occurred, once the key has been changed and the tenant is no longer physically in that property, it is near impossible to go back. We can't undo that. So if someone seeks legal assistance or community assistance 10 minutes too late, it really is time to start looking forward as to how can we find new housing for this person, this family, where can they sleep tonight? And it becomes the next crisis. So I think that is a part of the problem that we really need to be focusing on, is what is available for people as they are evicted. Hopefully we will have until March 31st with this new eviction moratorium before we see that in the mass that we saw it in November, but it is something that needs to be considered. I want to touch on the current eviction moratorium that Governor Sisolak has put in place and how that works. So the biggest problem that we have seen is that we hear the word moratorium, we read headlines that there is an eviction moratorium, and people presume that they are protected. At the beginning of the year, that was true. The governor's original actions and the actions of the justice courts alike were just stopping proceedings. There were no cases, there were no hearings, with very, very few minor exceptions for true safety crisis. That is not how this moratorium works. So the most important thing that we are trying to get across and shouting from rooftops every day is that in order for a family to be protected from an eviction, there are affirmative steps that they have to take. So first you have to qualify, which would be people who make less than $99,000 a year, people who received that first stimulus check. It's that same category of qualifiers economically. And then you have to have been impacted by COVID. You have a financial impact, someone in your household lost income, whatever the case may be. And then there's a declaration. You can use the CDC declaration. So it follows that same form where families have to affirmatively fill out this affidavit and give it to their landlord that says, I qualify for the eviction protections. Even then, you are not quite done if the landlord chooses to challenge that protection, chooses to file an eviction action anyway. So the most important thing to know is that Nevadans still have to respond to all court notices and all notices posted to their door, court orders, if they want to avail themselves of these protections that they qualify for. So there's a lot of people who we've seen believe they are protected, believe that means they don't have to respond, or believe that because they gave the declaration to their landlord, now it's over. I think the most nefarious one that we've seen is people have worked with their landlords to have the rental assistance granted, and they believe that because the landlord has opted into the rental assistance program and signed those documents, agreeing to accept the money on behalf of the tenant and has received the money on behalf of the tenant, that they don't need to respond to an eviction notice, seeing it as now moot. But in Nevada, under our eviction laws, if you do not respond as the tenant to an eviction notice by filing an answer with the court, your eviction can be summarily granted. So we have seen landlords who have not dismissed the eviction, who have moved forward anyways, despite receiving the rental assistance money. There may be recourse for that. There may be recourse for landlords who move forward with an eviction for qualified people without real evidence that they should not be covered. But at the end of the day, even if there's recourse, even if there are protections, the tenants have to be affirmatively responding in order to hope to avail themselves of those protections before it's too late. So to the extent that anyone here can help get that message out, I think it's really important that every time we're talking about the fact that Nevada has an eviction moratorium, in the same breath, it's an eviction moratorium that people can opt into with affirmative actions if they take them. And so for all of those reasons, and because the eviction moratorium does have exceptions built in, and it is not a universal flat protection, there are still evictions occurring, there are still court hearings occurring. And so there definitely are people in need right now who have been unable to navigate the nuances of this perfectly. But there is progress that has been made. I think we were in a bad place in November. We were not seeing safe conditions in some of the courthouses. And the justice courts are just now starting to put out administrative orders on how they are interpreting the governor's moratorium. And those include a greater push for telephonic hearings and accommodations, and ensuring a more uniform and fair, slow approach to how we handle this. So I see one question about what about immigrants without immigration status? And this is a question we get a lot. Under Nevada law, immigration status does not affect your rights as a tenant, your landlord-tenant laws. So people should feel free to avail themselves of these protections. The eviction moratorium applies to them. It applies to people who pay rent weekly, that live in what we call weeklies. Even though a lot of those landlords have claimed otherwise, it is definitively true and in the governor's FAQ that they are protected. So if you need help, again, I did put in the chat, or if you want to refer people as these issues arise to the different legal aid providers that can help people should they be fearing eviction at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey. Very helpful information, really good stuff. Appreciate you being with us this morning. And we know that continued mediation efforts are ongoing for homeowners and renters. To tell us how they're going is Shannon Chambers from Home Means Nevada. Shannon?
So good morning, Bill, and thank you very much for having me, and thank the Nevada Housing Coalition for having me. And I know in the interest of time, I will try and hit the high points here, but happy to talk to anybody offline about any of these issues. So I'm also the labor commissioner, so I get a unique perspective of seeing how the labor market gets impacted, and that ties right into, unfortunately, the housing market and the rental market. So when the first events of COVID-19 really started to hit last March, Home Means Nevada really started to prepare on the homeowner side. So we set up what was called the Homeowner Connect, where a homeowner could come in and do a live chat with the counselor, talk about what their options were, kind of anticipating that, you know, if we ever got to the point where notice of defaults and foreclosures started really picking up again, certainly not like the last real estate crisis, kind of like Senator Masto referenced, but, we wanted to be prepared. So we really prepared on the homeowner side and still have all those features. And then flash forward to August, where the issue of rental mediation came into focus with the special session in the Nevada legislature. So the one great thing about Home Means Nevada, and I work for a state agency and run a state agency, but running a nonprofit like Home Means Nevada is you have a little bit of flexibility to get things done quicker and to not certainly avoid state bureaucracy and some of the hangups that happen in that process, but we're able to get things up very quickly and running. So we were tasked with implementing the rental eviction mediation program by the Nevada Supreme Court. Once the moratorium lifted October 15th, 2020. So that was, I believe, the second moratorium that was issued by the governor. We started to see an absolute influx, kind of as Bailey indicated, of eviction cases and eviction filings, mainly in Las Vegas. So just to give you some perspective, between October 15th and basically December 15th, we processed 1,292 cases through the rental eviction mediation program. And when I speak to you about the speed of how fast that happens, that's very, very fast. Now, part of that is that the eviction process is very, very fast. It is not like the notice of default process on the homeowner side. The eviction process is basically 30, 45 days, sometimes even less. So it's very quick, and that's something I'm not going to opine on, and maybe that's something, the Nevada legislature is going to look at this session. But what the mediation program really provides, and the value, in my opinion, that it really gives to not only the tenant, but the landlord, is it's a neutral third party that can kind of sit down with the parties and say, this is what's available, this is what's not available, this is what's realistic, this is what's not realistic. And I will just give you one of the examples that we heard from one of the mediation cases was the tenant had received unemployment and was able to start paying their rent again, but they were too scared to go and talk to their landlord. So I just bring that up in a simple kind of way that these are some of the challenges. And one of the things that I've learned from running this rental eviction program now for basically 2.5, 3 months is a lot of the tenants just don't know where to go. And we talk about rental assistance and we talk about these things. And certainly I know so many of you on this call are doing everything you can for outreach, but some of these folks are just confused. They've submitted applications, they don't know what the status is, they don't know what they need to do. So the mediator, again, is there to look at the basic issue of, can this person fulfill their lease and pay rent? But they also do provide some value in that, they can get on the phone with somebody from rental assistance through the various entities and fast track things. And as the state treasurer indicated, I'm having additional conversations with the various entities on that, on ways that we can fast track that, because in some of the situations we've seen, and I'm not saying bad or good, nobody expected any of this to happen in the volume, but some of the applications, we've heard stories where they're sitting there 4 to 6 weeks, and it only takes one call from a mediator to the rental assistance agency to get that application processed and the money out the door. So, obviously want to respect the court process. And I want to say this too, that the landlords that we have dealt with through this program have been extremely professional and extremely reasonable. Now, I'm not saying that's, 100%, but I'm not going to say that on the tenant side either. The value in this program too is sometimes telling people the truth. And there are situations where there are tenants that just simply are in a situation that is not sustainable. And the quicker that gets processed, and we hope it doesn't get processed through the court, but if that takes a mediator to negotiate agreement where that tenant decides to move out and the landlord agrees to that, then that is a true value for the system because it doesn't burden the courts and it in some cases produces a better situation for the tenant. So, you know, we really, I think, are providing a great service. How this goes forward into 21, given that there's now another moratorium, but as Bailey said, there are evictions that are still happening. There are foreclosures that are still happening. So we deal with that on the homeowner side, but you know, I do think this program is a really good program. And, you know, my goal is how it can potentially function pre-court filing. Obviously, sometimes parties don't act until there is a legal filing or some type of court action, but the way to tie this into the rental assistance process to get those tenants the information they need, the struggle here too, and we're all dealing with it, and I'm dealing with it as the labor commissioner, is because we have offices that have to abide by rules because we want to protect the public health and we want to keep people safe. Sometimes that lack of one-on-one really does create challenges. So in terms of rental assistance, you know, we've had mediators say, well, they completed the entire application, but they didn't check one box. So that application sat there for 4 or 5 weeks because that tenant didn't check that one box. So, you know, we're going to work with all the parties involved in this process, and again, try and improve it and try and help landlords and help tenants and, you know, get assistance and hopefully avoid massive court filings and days where I know, and I did it personally myself, where I was assigning 100, 150 cases a day to mediators. You know, hopefully going into 21, we can kind of streamline some of these things and help people that really need assistance. And for those people that potentially just don't qualify, steer them into other, you know, paths where they get the help that they need, or if it's maybe just unfortunately moving out of that particular property, that may be what has to be done. But you know, we'll continue to work with everybody and continue to improve on this, and hopefully we can get the rental assistance side streamlined, and how that ties into the mediation, I think will be a good thing, because it really does provide a lot of value for the tenants, and I would say for the landlords too, because we do have agreements that get reached and people get to stay in their homes. So with that, I will stop, and again, happy to talk about any of these topics offline, because I know we're hitting up on the time frame. So thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. Really appreciate the great information. Just wonderful stuff for all of us. Although much of the discussion appropriately has surrounded the housing and the pandemic and been focused on renters, we can't afford to ignore our landlords who provide that housing. For an update on the outlook for landlords and vacancies in Nevada is Susie Vasquez from the Nevada State Apartment Association. Susie.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer. Nevada State Apartment Association represents 60% of apartment landlords in Nevada. Our members continue to weather the pandemic the best we can and remain focused on working with residents who continue to communicate with management. Rent assistance is assisting many, and with the recent approval of further assistance, many more Nevadans will be able to retain their current homes. While we are continuing with eviction filings, I want to stress that our members have focused on reserving that option for those who have not communicated with management or are not covered persons under the latest directive. The following statistics are being provided by CoStar, a recognized authority of analytics and marketing services for the real estate industry. I'm going to give you a lot of information, kind of rapid fire. I will be copying or submitting some of those into the chat, specifically by unit type rent averages currently, to kind of save a little time. So currently in the Las Vegas Valley, vacancy is at 5.7% compared to 7.2% a year ago. I want to note that nationally vacancy is 6.8%. Vacant units in the Las Vegas Valley currently number 9,800 units compared to 12,000 units a year ago. Concessions are seeing a decrease locally, and primarily because they are being targeted to current residents rather than prospective residents. And that's primarily due to the steady rate of qualified prospect traffic that's coming in from surrounding states. Average asking rent for the Las Vegas Valley is $1,133 compared to $1,085 last year. So there has been an increase of $49 over the year. Again, I'll be putting the unit type average rents in the chat, so make sure to look to that. Construction units decreased to 4,175 units, and that's primarily because we released 3,141 units over the last 12 months. The market sales price of an apartment unit is currently at $159,000 compared to $145,000 last year. And now I'll move on to Reno Sparks. Let me post that data for Las Vegas there. Reno Sparks, their current vacancy is actually in line with the national rate at 6.7% compared to 7.1% a year ago. This is high compared to past years, but is primarily attributed to the new construction units that are being released into the supply chain. Vacant units are the same as last year at 2,600, which tells us that the units that we are releasing into the market are being absorbed a lot quicker than we anticipated. We were anticipating a slowing of the market mid-2020 through the end of 2021 due to the influx of those units, but it's not as significant as we anticipated. Concessions are also seeing a decrease locally. This again is due to the number of units available and the influx of jobs bringing qualified prospect traffic from surrounding areas. EDON, by the way, is doing a phenomenal job at bringing jobs to the Reno Sparks area, so kudos to them. Average asking rent in the Reno Sparks area is $1,317, and that's $57 higher than a year ago at $1,259. Construction units decreased to 1,899, and that is due to releasing 1,244 units over the last 12 months. Market sales price for a unit in the Reno Sparks area is $184,000 per unit compared to last year's sales price of $167,000. 2019 was the first year to experience a normalization in the market, which had not been experienced in 10 years. We normally see a seasonal ebb and flow of move-ins and move-outs, but in the entire state of Nevada, actually, it was just continuous. We did not experience the seasonal ebbs and flows in prior years, but 2019 was the first year that we saw that. And therefore, we were anticipating a normalization of the market and rent growth returning to 3 to 4% in Southern Nevada. And we actually potentially were going to see maybe a slight decrease in rents in the Reno Sparks area. And that was primarily due to the number of units that were going to be released into the supply stream. But that is no longer the case. 2021 continues to bring uncertainty. While we forecasted normalization by the second quarter, when the moratorium was lifted in October, the new eviction moratorium has now pushed that back possibly to Q3 of 2021. The eviction moratorium will most certainly impact those who need to find a home that better suits their budgets given the decrease in available units. Our new forecast predicts a continued temporary decrease in vacancy due to the eviction moratorium, but also due to rent assistance, which will help retain housing. I must note that we don't know how the new parameters to who qualifies for rent assistance will impact those who are currently housed and in need. Even though thousands of units are slated for release, absorption of those units again continues to be better than anticipated given the influx of people moving to Nevada. Low vacancy and a steady demand for housing will make it challenging to fulfill our members' efforts to offer a larger number of units to house those who are participating in homelessness programs. However, we are committed to continue to work with advocates and nonprofits to create solutions for those who face housing barriers. So we will stay committed to providing a larger number of units to homelessness programs, but it'll be challenging given the vacancy rate that currently exists in Nevada. And that's all I have. Thank you so much. Again, I'm putting the Reno statistics here in the chat so you can write those down. Thank you so much again to the Nevada Housing Coalition, and I'll throw it back over to Mr. Brewer.
Thank you, Susie. Great information. Obviously, we could spend an hour on each of these topics that we just touched on this morning, but we appreciate all the folks who visited with us and provided this information. Very quickly, we want to open the floor to Sarah Sadian, who's with the National Low Income Housing Coalition, who will give us a little information on ongoing efforts in Washington, D.C. Sarah?
Great. Thank you so much for having me. And I appreciate all of the comments made before. It's a really thorough and comprehensive webinar. So I'll skip over things that I might have hit on that other people did, and I'll just focus on what's ahead in Washington, D.C. about additional COVID relief. And before I get started, I do want to thank everybody on the call for their advocacy over the last several months. Getting that $25 billion in emergency rental assistance and the extension of the moratorium was a huge lift. And it really wouldn't have been possible without strong and effective advocates on the ground. So thank you so much. And I know it's going to be a tremendous amount of work to put those resources to use as they reach your community, but we also have a ton of work ahead of us in DC. So shed a little bit of light on that. So what are we pushing for going forward? So now that this emergency package has been passed, we're turning our attention to the next COVID relief package, which hopefully will be more comprehensive than this one was. And there may be more possibilities or additional possibilities for additional resources too. So I want to talk a little bit about what those are. The first thing that we're pushing for is for an extension and an improvement to the eviction moratorium that was mentioned earlier. The bill extended it through the current moratorium through the end of January, but we know that that's just not long enough to make sure that renters can stay in their homes as rental aid is being distributed. And so we're advocating with the Biden administration to not only extend the existing moratorium, but to improve it. There are a number of challenges when it comes to implementing it, which other folks have pointed out, but just to name a couple. What we've seen is that some renters who know about the affirmative steps they need to take, they end up being protected, but many others who don't know about those protections are left on their own. And so what we're advocating is for the Biden administration to change the framework of that moratorium to make it automatic, universally apply to all renters without them having to take any affirmative steps. And we think that's going to help decrease the number of unlawful evictions that have been moved forward by landlords, and also lawful ones where renters just didn't know what protections that were in place to help them. Other things we're looking for on that moratorium is greater enforcement. There are civil penalties to be applied to landlords who violate the order, but we are hearing of tremendous stories of people whose landlords are continuing to move forward despite the moratorium being in place and violating the provisions of it, but there's been no enforcement so far by the federal government, and we're looking to hopefully change that to tamp down on those harmful actions. We also know that we need more rental assistance going forward. So $25 billion is a huge victory. It's a huge amount of money, but it doesn't come close to what we know renters already owe in back rent. Estimates put that at around $34 billion to $70 billion so far that renters already owe. We know there's continued need there as well. And lastly, we were disappointed to see that the bill did not include additional resources for homeless shelter and service providers. We know and are seeing just how devastating COVID can be in congregate shelters. And there's been an enormous movement to move people who are experiencing homelessness into hotels and motels to help keep them and their families safe. But we need more resources to help them do that. For all of these things, we are undergoing some research right now to come up with new, as accurate of number estimates of how much is needed. We're undergoing that process now, and as soon as we get updated estimates, we'll share it with everybody else. But this is also an opportunity for us to look a little bit longer term and a little bit broader than we have in the past about emergency assistance. For the last bill, Congress was very much focused on the most urgent, the most critical needs. And now that we've passed that bill, it gives us an opportunity to look a little bit broader. So we're starting to think through what that could look like, and I'm looking forward to your input on that. But some things could include housing vouchers for people who are currently being housed in hotels and motels, so that they can move into permanent housing solutions rather than being pushed back into homelessness. We've heard a lot of people who are interested in acquisition funds to help purchase those hotels or motels, convert into permanent housing. So very open to your ideas about what that could look like. I will say also that given the news yesterday about Democrats controlling the Senate, which means that they control the White House, the House, and the Senate, that does open up a lot of possibilities about COVID relief and beyond on housing issues. And so we're very excited and starting to dig into what are those things that could be moved this year. We're already hearing the possibility of Democrats using what's called as a budget reconciliation to move COVID relief. That's a procedural move that would allow them to pass legislation with only 51 votes rather than 60 votes. Under a budget reconciliation, you can't have a filibuster. And so that would help move that legislation more easily. And because of that, we're hoping we'll see Democrats look more strategically about how we can prepare for the next crisis. So I know one of the major things we'll be pushing for is universal housing vouchers for every household that's eligible. That's something that was included in the Biden housing plan during the campaign, and that we hope to see enacted this year, because we know that if we had universal vouchers in place prior to COVID, it would have been a lot easier to keep people in their homes over the course of the last several months. And as you all know, when people are evicted from their homes, it puts their lives at risk, it puts their families' lives at risk, and it impacts our broader community because it puts strain on our already overstretched healthcare systems. And so I think this crisis has shown us that housing is healthcare, and I'm hoping that in the next year we can make some really positive, big achievements to move housing policy forward. So there are some ways that folks can stay engaged. I'll put links in the chat box, but we host a national call every Monday from 2:30 to 4 Eastern time, where we share the most relevant information about what's happening at the federal level. We hear updates about what's happening locally, and we provide information about how you can be engaged with your members of Congress. We also have working groups that meet every day of the week on specific issues related to FEMA, related to state and local implementation of these funds. I encourage you to check that out and participate if you're able to. So I'm going to share those in the chat box now. I'll also share a link to our fact sheet on all of the housing provisions that were in the relief package, all the stipulations around it. And soon I'll be able to share with Christine a letter we're sending to Treasury, urging them to put out guidance as soon as possible that provides as much flexibility as possible so that your state and local governments can very quickly distribute rental assistance to households that are in need. We're hoping to see that come out soon, but with the chaos that's happening in DC yesterday, with the Trump administration ending in less than 2 weeks, we might not see that guidance for a little bit of time. And with that, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Great update, and we look forward to good things in the coming year, for sure. Just want to let everybody know that we'll be updating everyone on January the 21st with a legislative overview with an eye towards the issues that'll be affecting housing in Nevada. This will run from 9 to 10:30. There are links in the chat box, so be sure and register for that. We'll also be sending an invitation out shortly for you through email. Look forward to that discussion. We appreciate all of the panelists who have contributed this morning. It's been so informative. We wish we had more time to discuss these issues. Thank you to everyone who's joined us, and we look forward to meeting with you again in the near future. Thank you.